President Claudine Gaines says they are seeing a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on campus.
We have increased security measures, expanded reporting channels, and augmented counseling, mental health, and support services. We have reiterated that speech that incites violence, threatens safety, or violates Harvard's policies against bullying and harassment is unacceptable.
Gay says the university is trying to confront hate while allowing free expression. The debate over aid to Ukraine will come into greater focus today on Capitol Hill. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has invited Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to address members in a closed-door briefing. We get more from Bloomberg's Jody Schneider.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer set up a test vote on trying to advance a national security package that would include funding for Ukraine. He wants that to happen tomorrow. So this afternoon's briefing presumably will be with the Ukrainian president saying how badly needed this funding is.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are trading mixed. Yields are dropping across the U.S. curve as job openings hit the lowest since March of 2021. S&P 500 index down 7 now, a drop there of 0.2%. The Nasdaq 100 index, little changed. It is up now by less than 0.1%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 20, a gain there of 0.1%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is lower by 119 points, a drop right now of 0.3%. 10-year yield 4.17%, with the 2-year at 4.58%. Spot gold down $10 the ounce, down 0.5% to 2018, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.2%, 72.89 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin up again, up 3.1% right now with a 43,000 handle, 43,376 on Bitcoin. As for the overall market outlook and the possibility of Fed rate cuts, Lee Farage is head of multi-asset strategy at State Street, and he told us this morning, you got to be looking back a year.
It feels like we've got over our skis again. It's interesting, if you look back to last year, the S&P was up 6% in November, down 6% in December. Now, I'm not saying we're going to reverse all the gains this time, but I look at what's priced for the Fed. It looks overly aggressive in terms of the rate cuts that we've got in now. 5 for next year, first one in May, just looks too much to me.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Former cargo hauler Yellow Corp has agreed to sell its trucking terminals to more than 20 companies for $1.9 billion, a move that likely ends a long-shot effort to revive the bankrupt company. Those winning bidders do include XPO, which agreed to buy 26 owned locations and 2 leased terminals for $870 million. XPO shares, they're down now by 3.6%. Again, recapping, stocks are trading mixed. Nasdaq is higher, the Dow, the S&P both lower. 9-point drop right now on the S&P 500 index, down by about 0.3%. And that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie Powell, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Just met Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, talking about the performance of risk-on assets in the month of November. Investment-grade corporates returned about 6% in November, which was their best month of performance since 2008. So everybody seemingly had a great month of November. Where do we go from here in the investment-grade credit space? Natalie Trevithick joins us. She's head of investment-grade credit strategy at Payden and Regal. So Natalie, heck of a month for so many parts of the marketplace here. As you take a look at the investment-grade credit market, where are you guys going from here?
Yeah, November was such a great month, and it was nice to have positive returns on the year. And the good thing is a lot of it is actually excess returns from the credit component. That's 3.5% of the returns year to date. So going from here, we think we've seen a big move in credit with spreads 25 basis points tighter on the year. We thought this would be a kind of coupon clipping year. It turned out to be a struggle, but we are kind of getting close to that as we approach year end. But we think next year is well set up for credit really to perform, to get that carry from the coupons of roughly, 5.5%. Then maybe add some in if we do get some Fed cuts. We aren't really in the camp, though. We think the Fed may be on hold for all of 2024.
Really? Because that's, just looking at the WIRP function,
right,
the market's pricing in a lot more than that. So how are you guys approaching it?
We're really looking at the employment markets for an indicator, and even though that JOLTS data was a little bit weaker, we really don't see a big pickup in the unemployment rate. And if we continue to see inflation moderate, or at least not accelerate, and unemployment stays very low, we foresee a soft landing and even some decent GDP growth, and we don't see a reason for the Fed to cut in that scenario, which would also be good for corporate bonds, because in that scenario, they shouldn't be widening either.
What would need to shift in order for you to think cuts would be necessary next year?
We'd really have to see that unemployment rate pick up and even further signs of inflation moderation. We have been getting some good news, and we think when we get the dot plot from the Fed next week, they are going to take that one hike out of the dot plot. But we really need to see a change in the unemployment rate moving higher.
So in terms of kind of duration, I mean, for a while there, I was, tempted just to go into a 2-year treasury, but then, I'm thinking about maybe going out a little bit longer. So on the investment grade credit market, where are you guys in terms of duration?
Yeah, extending duration has really been the call here. And it was funny because a lot of duration buyers really came in after they got the confidence that the Fed was done hiking. So we've seen super strong demand for 10 and 30-year corporates. Those have dramatically outperformed on the year over the front end, despite yielding less than the front end still. So people want to lock in these higher rates for longer. And we really think that is the right call to be making here. Since even if we don't think we might not get all those Fed cuts next year, we think they will come eventually down the road. And even still, it's an attractive place to be in the market.
What are some of the top questions that you're getting from your clients?
Yeah, one of the concerns we're getting is what do these higher borrowing costs and interest rates mean for credit? Is this really going to hurt their fundamentals and ability to pay these higher coupons? But what we've seen is actually that companies only refund about, 5 to 10% of their debt on an annual basis in investment grade. So they have a very well built out maturity wall. So even though they've had to pay much higher coupons recently, it doesn't really impact their overall borrowing cost. That's only gone up from about 3.5% to a little over 4% today. So we don't think this is a big fundamental concern for credit.
What are some of the sectors that you guys find attractive here?
Yeah, we like the communication sector, specifically the media sector. We've seen
Nice.
some of those names rip a lot tighter recently. Take-Two Interactive, Warner Brother Discovery, Paramount. Technology has also been performing well. We like some of the triple B names. Of course, the big tech companies are very stable and their spreads don't move a lot, but we're seeing more bang for your buck if you go down a little bit more in names such as Broadcom.
What sectors aren't performing quite as well in the investment grade corporate space that you would maybe advise clients not to buy?
So a little ironically, it's the higher quality sectors that are performing. I don't want to say the worst, but it's some of those consumer non-cyclical names, the ones which are very steady, the very highly rated credits, utilities. And they aren't performing just because they don't have as much room to tighten in spreads because they're already trading pretty tight to begin with. So it's been a little bit of a beta chasing rally over the past quarter. So we're seeing those higher volatility, higher spreading names outperform the defensive names.
What's the new issue activity these days? It seems quiet, although except for maybe the banks, every time they report earnings, they kind of come out with some more paper. But what's the new issue market look like, and kind of how do you guys approach that? What's your appetite for new issues?
Yeah, we like the new issues, but they aren't coming with very big concessions anymore just because the demand for credit is so voracious. So we'd say, it's surprising in December. We had a pretty busy yesterday and today in the new issue market. Again, a lot of that's going to be the banks, but we're going to end the year right at that 1.2 trillion in total issuance, which is what we were expecting at the beginning of the year and in line with what we saw in 2022. So it is definitely a great place to kind of refresh our portfolios, get access to some new credits when they come to market, but it's not providing a huge amount of value in terms of the concessions these deals are coming at, just given that demand.
We only have about a minute left. What do you think the credit market is telling us about where the economy is headed?
I think they're telling us that we are likely to get a soft landing because this has been the most well-telegraphed recession to never have happened.
Right.
So these management teams have had such a long time to prepare if they did feel they had any balance sheet weakness in terms of reducing CapEx or doing some layoffs if needed. But we're actually seeing, a resumption of share buybacks, dividend increases. So these companies are giving us signals that the economy can continue to perform in the year ahead.
Hey, Natalie, thank you so very much for joining us. Natalie Trevithick, she's head of investment grade credit strategy at Payden Regal, former portfolio manager at PIMCO as well, so a lot of experience in the fixed income space. And when I look to the IN-GO function for the Bloomberg Index browser, the best performing fixed income category this year surprises me. It's really outperforming, and that's U.S. corporate high yield, up 9.8%.
Wow.
Year to date, really outperforming everything else, which is kind of in that 1% to 2% range, whether you're talking about governments or treasuries, or, more mortgage-backed securities. So high yield and with all the talk of recession, that's kind of surprising a little bit.
Yeah, still strength there. And then also, she was just mentioning buybacks. But if you look at Bank of America's client data from today, accelerating among their corporate clients, so tracking above those seasonal levels for a fourth consecutive week, Paul.
Yep, absolutely. All right, S&P 500 off 0.2%. The NASDAQ unchanged on the day. The Dow off about 0.4%. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Lisa Mateo.
You got it, Paul. Patients with a prescription from their doctor will now be able to get Eli Lilly's Zepbound at their local drugstore. Bloomberg's Ann Cates has that story.
Eli Lilly's new weight loss drug is now available at U.S. pharmacies, offering an alternative to rival medications like Wegovy, which are in short supply. Zepbound was approved by the Food and Drug Administration in early November as an obesity treatment. It has now been added to the list of prescription drugs for Express Scripts and Cigna Healthcare this month.
Zepbound costs just over $1,000 for a month's supply before rebates, and that's nearly $300 cheaper than Novo Nordisk Wegovy. Right now, Eli Lilly is up about 0.5%, Novo Nordisk down about 1%. And shares of Take-Two Interactive, well, they're lower this morning. This afternoon, after its Rockstar Games unit said that Grand Theft Auto 6 won't be released until 2025. Bloomberg's Isabel Lee says it's due to a leak of the game's trailer.
Analysts saw the trailer as a positive, but still, the fact that it was being published in 2025 and the fact that there's no set release date is what's causing some disappointment. Now, why is this closely watched? Because Grand Theft Auto 6 is likely to impact Take-Two's revenue growth. So if you recall, the previous game, which is Grand Theft Auto 5, debuted in 2013, and it was the second best-selling video game in history.
Take-Two down about 1.5%. And it's a role shakeup at Airbnb. The company has elevated its CFO, Dave Stevenson, to a new position, Chief Business Officer, overseeing its business strategy, including its overseas expansion. Now, Ellie Mertz, a finance executive who has been with the company for 11 years, will take over as CFO. Brian Chesky says Airbnb is looking to turn a corner after refining its core business this past year. Those are the company stories we're following.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, looking at these markets, kind of a mixed day out there. The S&P off about 0.2%, the Dow off 0.3%, the Nasdaq kind of unchanged, up just slightly. Yields coming in with the 10-year Treasury yielding 4.17%. WTI crude oil pretty steady here, just under $73 per barrel. Gold, it's pulling back about 0.6%, $2,017 for gold, and Bitcoin up another 3.25%. 43,400. Matt Miller going to the bank. Ka-ching. Good for him. But he forgot his little token account number kind of thing. So that's a little bit of a problem. Let's head down to Washington, D.C. right now. We'll get World and National News with Nancy Lyons.
Thanks, Paul. The presidents of Harvard, MIT, and UPenn have been facing questions on Capitol Hill today over their handling of anti-Semitism on their campuses. During a House subcommittee hearing, MIT President Sally Kornbluth addressed the increase in hate speech on her campus.
Those who want us to shut down protest language are, in effect, arguing for a speech code. But in practice, speech codes do not work. Problematic speech needs to be countered with other speech and with education. And we are doing that.
MIT's Sally Kornbluth says they're increasing conversations on campus. The subcommittee chair, Republican Congresswoman Virginia Fox, blames the surging campus anti-Semitism on, quote, the race-based ideology of the radical left. The ranking member of the subcommittee, Congressman Bobby Scott, accused Republicans of calling for action and failing to fund civil rights agencies that are responsible for addressing hate speech. For FBI Director Christopher Wray, it's the rise in threats that's kept his agency busy since the Hamas attack on Israel.
Given the steady drumbeat of calls for attacks by foreign terrorist organizations since October 7th, we're working around the clock to identify and disrupt potential attacks by those inspired by Hamas's horrific terrorist attacks in Israel.
Wray appeared today before the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're now learning, in a rare punitive move against Israel, the State Department says it will impose travel bans on extremist Jewish settlers who've been implicated in a rash of recent attacks on Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be appealing directly to U.S. senators today ahead of a vote this week on funding Ukraine's war with Russia. He'll be making a Zoom call with them this afternoon. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Paul and Jess.
All right, Nancy Lyons, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Jess, our old friend Joe Mysak has added again. Senior living facility defaults are top of mind for municipal bond investors worried about the money they have amassed in the graying of America. Bonds sold to finance senior living, which includes assisted living, continuing care retirement communities, and nursing homes, account for almost $582 million of the $1.7 billion in monetary defaults so far this year. That's according to data compiled by Bloomberg. No other segment comes close. I thought this was like a long-term secular growth story, the graying of America. How can that not be a good gig?
I know. Apparently, defaults at senior living centers hit a record in 2021. So this came as the pandemic, of course, driving up labor and protective equipment costs. So the stress in the sector remain at elevated levels after federal aid programs sunsetted.
Interesting. So here's what Fitch has to say here. Rising costs of capital and labor, higher interest rates, and volatility in the housing sector have weakened our sector outlook over the last 5 years, despite strengthening demographics as the baby boomer generation reaches retirement age, said Margaret Johnson, as senior director at Fitch Ratings, talking about the senior living space. So I guess that secular tailwinds are hitting some more shorter term headwinds. Again, rising labor costs, the protective equipment they had to put in there for the pandemic. That's been a challenge for a lot of these facilities.
So Joe Mysak at it again here at Bloomberg News. So talking about how that defaulted debt sold for care communities, nursing homes, and assisted living. So looking at how senior living defaults peaking after the pandemic, Paul.
All right, we'll have to see. Well, maybe we'll talk with him on a Friday. We tend to do that on Fridays, talk municipal bonds. Maybe he'll have something to say there. Exactly right. S&P 500 down 0.1%. All right, sound on with Joe Matthew from Washington, D.C. That starts right now.
Now, from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover that.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Ukraine makes a last-ditch pitch in D.C. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the top brass from Kyiv makes an in-person argument for funding from the U.S. today on Capitol Hill. Just a day after the White House made clear we are running out of money and time. We'll talk about the ask and the potential answer from Capitol Hill today with Kurt Volker, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, former special representative for NATO negotiations, Ukraine negotiations, will be with us here at the table today. The lineup is now set for this week's Republican primary debate. No Labels now says it's open to a Nikki Haley ticket. We'll talk about all these stories with our political panel. Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, with us today, along with Democratic strategist Jim Kessler from Third Way. And we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. Let's get to trading in New York right now with Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. We are looking at a down Tuesday here, 2 losing days in a row potentially. Right now, the S&P is down 7, a decline of 0.1%. The Dow down 107 right now. That is a drop of just about 0.3%. The Nasdaq Composite Index holding on to a gain right now. We do have the Nasdaq Composite Index up 8. It is the Nasdaq 100 Index that is lower now by 8 points, down by about 0.1%. We've got spot gold also trading lower, down 0.6%, 2017 right now on gold. 10-year yield 4.17%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.58%. Bitcoin keeps on going, up another 3.1%, 43,320 right now on Bitcoin. And West Texas Intermediate crude is slumping 0.4%, WTI 72.72 a barrel. Apollo Global Management's Mark Rowan says it is getting harder for active managers to beat indexes in public markets, and that it is easier for investors to find alpha in private markets. He sat down, Bloomberg Radio sat down with the CEO this morning at Apollo's New York headquarters.
Public markets, they're so correlated and indexed to interest rates and to money flows that if you actually want alpha, outperformance, you need to step away from public markets. And I think that's happening because we're also revisiting the notion of public being safe and private being risky. This is the framework we used to be in. Private meant venture capital, hedge funds, private equity. Now it just means less liquid.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Banks remain under pressure after KeyCorp's non-interest income outlook. Cleveland-based lender said it sees fourth quarter non-interest income down 5 to 8% compared with the third quarter versus its prior forecast of up 1 to 3%. KeyCorp shares, they're down 3.8% among other banks. We've got JP Morgan Chase down 0.1%, Bank of America down 0.8%, Citigroup right now lower by 1.2%. Recapping, stocks are mixed with the S&P down 5, a drop right now of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we do thank you. As always, welcome to the Tuesday edition of Bloomberg Sound On. How is possibly only Tuesday? I'm Joe Matthew in Washington with a lot to talk about. We're going to start with the situation in Ukraine and actually what's happening here in the Capitol today. It's pretty important as Ukraine makes this last-ditch effort to pull something here out of the fire in terms of funding, dispatching top leaders from Kyiv to the Capitol. They're here now, including President Zelensky's chief of staff, the defense ministry, the speaker of the Ukrainian parliament, and President Zelensky himself, not in person, but will zoom in to a meeting with senators later on today to make the case here. This is apparently something that the Biden administration helped to arrange. And with us at the table to talk about this, among other issues, is Kurt Volker. You've heard him on the program before, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, former special representative for Ukraine negotiations. With us at the table, Mr. Ambassador, it's great to see you, and I appreciate your coming here today in what's a pretty important moment for the cause in Ukraine. Will this in-person cajoling help?
You know, it's always good for the Ukrainians to make the case and to be communicating and to give some reassurance that any assistance they get is being used well. But this is caught up on something completely different. You have the Republicans, basically a majority of the Republicans and a majority of Democrats as well, supporting aid to Ukraine. If you took this to a floor vote in the House, you'd get 350 votes. What they are concerned about is doing that without something on this, you know, funding for the southern border.
Yes, right.
Because they want to show that we are taking care of American security in addition to helping Ukraine with its security. And this is something the White House doesn't want to do. So they're trying to turn up the heat on, you know, the letter that you saw from OMB yesterday, such sharp language, making it so dire. We're going to run out of money. Ukraine's going to fall. It's going to be a disaster.
Yes.
Which is partially true. But the reason it's being emphasized that way is to try to avoid getting that funding for the southern border that they don't want.
So let's unpack a couple of the things that you just said there, and we'll start with the letter. How is it partially true then? Because Shalanda Young says Ukraine is out of money and running out of time.
Right. That's the part that's true. That's what I'm saying. It is true that the money that was approved back in December last year was good for a supplemental to carry us till about September. Then we had a small increment on top of that that got us through December. What's in front of the Congress now is enough money to cover us for next year. And then we're not going to have to vote on this again during the election. That's what everybody wants. So that is true, that's when that money is scheduled to run out. What I'm saying is that the emphasis on this now, raising the political temperature, has all to do with this package that is trying to get put together in the Senate.
So let's talk more about that for a moment then, because, you know, here we are hashing out details on asylum law, talking about the parole system here in Washington. What does Kyiv make of this debate and being somehow drawn into the debate about our border?
This is the curse of Ukraine. They are always sucked into our domestic politics in one way or another.
How true.
Yeah, and they don't like it. They don't want it. They were the subject of the impeachment against President Trump. They're the subject of all the Hunter Biden stuff. They're now the they're the roadkill or the football that gets passed around when we're talking about immigration policy.
Wow. And the argument here is we can't help someone else in their security until we help ourselves.
That is the argument that the Republicans are making, and it seems to me, you know, we've been in Washington a long time. We see this almost every year. People raise the temperature on both sides. They go down to the last minute, and then they finally just stitch it together, pass a package, and it's done, and then forget about it.
Well, so what's the argument from Volodymyr Zelensky today that maybe hasn't been heard already? Is it that Putin will win if you don't pay? And then that's what lawmakers keep hearing, but it's not moving the needle here.
No, it's not. It's not a new argument. It is a moral clarity argument that they are actually fighting for democracy, fighting for freedom, against barbarianism, against war crimes, horrific things that the Russians have done and continue to do. And I guess one of the things that he'll be saying now is what we are seeing with Hamas terrorism against Israel. It's very similar to what we saw with Russia against Ukraine, just on a larger scale.
Let's talk about what's actually happening on the ground there, by the way. We've been so focused on a debate over funding. We've heard as well that the window could be closing in terms of military opportunity. But we're going into winter. And I believe it was General Mark Kimmett who said on the program that that's actually a good thing for Ukraine, that it will slow things down, that it might actually be an opportunity if Ukraine should have a gap in funding.
Right. I think that Mark is right on that. The Ukrainians have tried to launch a substantial counteroffensive. They got a little bit, but not very much. The Russian defenses have held pretty well. The Ukrainians have then turned toward longer-range, precision-guided attacks against logistics and infrastructure that are sustaining the Russian forces. If the weather then slows the Russians down in their attacks against Ukraine, they can get a little bit of a breather, and yet they keep the pressure on the Russian logistics through those precision-guided attacks. That actually could work to Ukraine's advantage and help them emerge from the winter a little bit better shape than they're in now.
If you went back 20 or 30 years, I know these questions are fun, and you went up on Capitol Hill and got all the Republicans in a room and said, hey, we've decimated half the Russian military. a little bit more money, we could actually finish this job and no Americans got involved. Would that not be sold?
That would be in a heartbeat. I mean, we literally less than 5% of the annual U.S. defense budget has eliminated half of the Russian conventional military capability.
It's incredible.
The Ukrainians have done the best job of threat reduction of anyone from a U.S. perspective.
Yeah. So what does that leave Ukraine, however, still badly outnumbered?
Well, if you think about the numbers here, Russia has poured about 100 to 150 billion into their war effort against Ukraine. The U.S. and the EU, 22 times the size of the Russian economy, and we've put in about the same amount. So that's why it's stuck. If we actually leaned into this, Russia would be on its back feet.
It's an interesting argument that doesn't seem to be landing terribly well.
It's not right now. It's not. And I think one of the things, and again, I point back to the Republican members in the House, people like Speaker Johnson have indicated that they want to bring it to the floor, they want to vote in favor, but they just want to hear clear answers. What is the goal? What's the strategy for achieving the goal? And what are the resources needed to do it so that we actually do it? And instead, we get a lot of very vague statements, like, as long as it takes. Well, what's it? What are we trying to do?
Well, that's the call that we've been hearing from a number of senators here. There was a particular quote that I was looking for, and I'm not going to find it, but Speaker Johnson wants an endgame.
Yeah.
He wants to know what the strategy is that'll be different in 24 than it was in 23. Is the administration capable of answering that, or is that just the wrong question to be asking?
No, I think it's the right question, and I think what we see is the administration doesn't want to answer that because they don't want to talk about defeating Russia. Because of the risks of escalation, the risk of possible nuclear use, they don't want to get sucked into saying something that will then be used against them as saying, oh, you're getting us into World War III. So they just don't want to answer that. But I honestly believe that we do have to answer that. We can help the Ukrainians defeat the Russian forces so that the war would end that way on better terms and bring Ukraine into NATO as quickly as possible and stop the war, shut it down. I don't think that anyone really wants to see any nuclear use. I don't think the Russian military wants that. I don't think Putin wants that. But as long as he thinks that they can win, and as long as we keep signaling that we'll never bring him into NATO as long as the war's going on, that's an incentive for Putin to keep fighting.
Could Ukraine win this war in 2024?
It could. It could. I think it all depends on what happens inside Russia. You know, they've lost over 100,000 lives fighting this war. That's an awful lot. And you think about the number of wounded. You think about the impact in Russian society. You think about the impact that sanctions have had on travel, on air travel, on Russians not able to use their credit cards when they travel abroad. I mean, this is a significant impact on the Russian society, and you just wonder how long they can sustain that.
Well, we are wondering that, and of course, lawmakers want to bet on a winner, right? They want someone to say, yeah, we'll have this thing done by July.
I would flip that around if I was talking to the lawmakers. I'd say, imagine a situation where Putin wins. Where Ukraine is defeated, the U.S. and the West appear not to have had the will and the resolve to defend Ukraine and stop Putin from taking over another country. How is that going to go over anywhere in the world? What are the Iranians going to make of that? What are the Chinese going to make of that? What are the North Koreans going to make of that? You open the door to a lot more risk if you don't help Ukraine win.
Kurt Volker, great conversation. I'm so glad you could come in, former ambassador. Great to see you, sir.
Thank you so much.
You're always welcome here at the table at Bloomberg.
And now we get to hear from the great Rick Davis.
That's right, former colleagues. That's right. Rick is here every day, and he's joined by Jim Kessler today as we assemble our political panel for their take on all of this. Rick Davis, your thoughts today on the conversation that we're having and the impact that it might have. Remember, President Zelensky was here in person in September. He's going to be zooming into this meeting today, but a lot of folks, very high officials, ranking officials from Kyiv, are actually pressing flesh today on Capitol Hill in the Senate. Will it matter?
Yeah, I think it matters. It mattered then when President Zelensky came. Very well orchestrated trip. He's done this repeatedly at global confabs around the world, in other capitals, in NATO, and so I give him immense credit for knowing who his friends are. Right, making sure he spends the time and his senior leadership spend the time talking with, answering questions for, and representing how much value our money and weapon systems and support mean to the Ukrainian people and to the war effort. That being said, I think, Ambassador Volker, great shout out. Thank you, Kurt. He makes a very critical point, which is that this is a very nuanced and managed message at this point, right? Nobody is talking about how they get to an ultimate victory over Russia. It's one of these things where it's like, how do you sustain the battle without being too specific on what the ultimate end game is? In other words, will you win in 6 months? Will this surge result in, regaining X amount of territory? And so we're in this period of time where it's harder to pinpoint what the positive effects of our support are than it is to be able to talk about what the negative impact would be if we don't support Ukraine. And of course, that's what we saw in that OMB language. It focused on, here's the negative impact, Congress, that you're going to have. You're going to reward Vladimir Putin if you don't get that money in the pipeline. So I think this is really a critical period of time, and I'm not surprised that they are the Ukrainian officials are drawing parallels to the attacks from Hamas on Israel, because that is what's first to mind right now. It's still a fresh concept, and as Ambassador Volker said, it's just it's a matter of scale. I mean, that same things happened in Ukraine. It just happened longer and impacted even more people.
Jim Kessler, welcome back. It's good to see you. Speaker Mike Johnson tweets, Republicans, quote, have legitimate concerns about the lack of a clear strategy in Ukraine, a path to resolving the conflict, or a plan for adequately ensuring accountability for aid, unquote. What should be the answer to that?
That's an unhelpful tweet. Let's just start with that. I thought what Ambassador Volker said was very important and worth listening to. And the most important thing was, imagine that Vladimir Putin wins. I mean, that is the case that that Republicans need to hear. Look, I'm shocked and disappointed where a lot of elected Republicans are. There is a growing isolationist wing within the Republican Party that says that America is not an essential force for good, a military force for good out in the world. And we're seeing that in Ukraine. And, look, I think we all had greater hopes that the last 6 months would bring more gains.
Take a quick breath on that, Jim. We're going to have much more time straight ahead with Jim Kessler and Rick Davis.
news, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. Stocks are trading mixed. Yields are dropping across the U.S. curve as job openings hit the lowest since March. The S&P right now lower by 3 points, down by about 0.1%. The Dow down 78 points, down 0.2%. The Nasdaq Composite Index is up 29. That is a gain of 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.18% with a 2-year at 4.60%. Spot gold down $10 the ounce to 2018, a decline of 0.5%. Bitcoin up 3.9%, 43,682 on Bitcoin, and West Texas Intermediate crude is retreating by 0.5%, 72.67 for a barrel of WTI. Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan says there are signs the U.S. economy is slowing, but his firm still expects a soft landing rather than a recession. Moynihan's remarks came today at the Goldman Sachs U.S. Financial Services Conference. Bank of America shares down 0.8%. Recapping, little change right now on the S&P 500 index, down 1 point, down less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
An all-senators classified briefing is set for a bit later today, a briefing on Ukraine that will feature President Zelensky himself via Zoom to make a last-ditch pitch for funding. But senators just got a whole bunch more news here. We're going to talk about this. We'll talk through all of it, in fact, with our panel. Jim Kessler from Third Way, Democratic analyst, and Republican strategist Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with us here with breaking news now. NBC and Politico both reporting that the coach relents. Senator Tommy Tuberville is releasing his holds. He's lifting his holds on a number of military promotions that, of course, have been held up for months here in his lone man protest against the abortion travel policy at the Pentagon. Details now, this happened behind closed doors at a GOP luncheon a short time ago. Tuberville will release holds except for 4 stars. We actually told you about this in reporting a couple of weeks ago, that this might be the off-ramp, the form that this takes. Let them all go but the 4 stars. Let these families who have been holding personal decisions, keeping kids out of school, not being able to move and so forth, let them go and get some movement here. This, of course, following a rule change that Senator Chuck Schumer brought forth, and that's where we'll start with our panel here. Jim Kessler, they said it would take Republicans to end this. Was it, in fact, Chuck Schumer that paved the road?
Well, they did, and, let's give credit to Mitch McConnell on this, too, because, he wanted this to end as well. Tuberville caved. Let's be clear. He should have caved 6 months ago. We have too many performance artists in the U.S. Congress and in the U.S. Senate right now. This was an absolute pointless waste of time for the United States Senate. Our military leaders did not need this. Congratulations to Chuck Schumer for, twisting his arms, and congratulations for Mitch McConnell for showing his impatience on this.
What do you think, Rick Davis? We've talked about this a lot. We've even had Tommy Tuberville come on to defend his position here. Was it that rule change? Was it the threat of finally having Republicans point him in a different direction that changed his view?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nothing else actually happened. In fact, as I understand from the reporting, he even said that the deal he would like to do is he'll lift the hold on 400 nominations for confirmation if Republicans chose to vote against the standing rule that would have undermined his ability to block any of them. So, look, I mean, nobody wanted to change this Senate rule. They shouldn't have had to, as Jim Kessler said, that none of this should have been happening along the way. Tommy Tuberville, the coach, did a lot to diminish our military and his sort of performance art around abortion. And at the end of the day, he's not going to get anything other than now a group of 4 stars who have to kowtow to him in order to get their confirmations passed. I mean, why you would let 400 nominations go forward and hold up the people who are most responsible for making the decisions about our country's security abroad and keep them locked up, it makes no sense. But nothing he has done on this issue has made much sense to date.
What is the point of that, Jim? Is that sort of the equivalent of the, you know, the top 1%, they're elitists or something? He's disparaged high-ranking generals before, saying their staff does all the work. Is that the point of that delineation with the 4 stars?
So you're asking me to get into the head of the senator from Alabama here. It's not a place I generally try and tread. Look, I think he's trying to get some big leap of showing that he's still standing on some sort of principle while he beats a belated, but at this point, hasty retreat. You know, there's this myth that there's wokeness in the Army and in the military that I think is again, I think it plays on social media and on some cable channels. And, you know, we just have too many people playing to the bleachers on this in the United States Senate. And he backed down 95% of the way. You know, hopefully he'll back down the other 5% when, you know, when there's no victory for him to find here.
Well, I wonder what playing to the bleachers means for border reform here, Rick, because that's what we were getting to at the top of the hour here, this pitch from top brass in Ukraine trying to unlock funding here in the U.S., having heard from the White House that they're out of money, we're all out of money in funding this war effort by the end of the year. It all hinges on a border deal, though. We know that. And the language from those who are directly involved is remarkable. Senator Cornyn to NBC News, this is not a traditional negotiation. This is a price that has to be paid in order to get the supplemental. They're not interested in dancing with Democrats here. They want a certain measure of reform here that's going to have to unlock the Ukraine money. Speaker Johnson says it's H.R. 2 or nothing. Now look at Jim Lankford, Republican, who's leading the negotiations. He says, we're going to get it resolved, but I'm going to pick up 20 Democrats in the Senate to get to 60. Chris Murphy says, I understand the consequences of the tactic Republicans have decided to use, and it's Vladimir Putin marching into Europe. Does this sound like we're close to a deal, Rick?
Yeah, it actually does. That means there's
a lot
of pressure on. Just a couple of days ago, we were talking about they killed the negotiation on Friday. Everybody went home. We thought there'd be progress. There wasn't. Now, after 24 hours in town, we've got all these different scenarios. And ironically, none of them have anything to do with the policy that Republicans are trying to get embedded. It's like, how do you count votes? And look, this is how Washington works. It used to be called a trade. I'll give you what you want if you give me what I want, and we'll call that a deal. Now it's called extortion. If you want funding for Ukraine and for Israel and for Taiwan, then you have to give me my southern border funding the way I want it and the rules that go along with it. I actually think this is a positive. It's a crappy way to do business. Welcome to Washington. But if we could get border security or some sort of manifestation of that, along with funding these important fights that the West is endorsed, I'll take it as I can get it. As Ambassador Volker said, if you got that bill in front of the House, it doesn't matter what the Speaker says. There's 350 votes. They're going to say, let's go forward.
Isn't that something? Jim Kessler, you worked for Chuck Schumer. Maybe you can get into his brain a little bit here, because Jim Lankford, who's actually touching Democrats, he's actually dealing with this in a real way and leading negotiations, says H.R. 2 did not get a single Democrat vote in the House. So what does Chuck Schumer think he can sell Democrats in the Senate?
Well, let me just say first that I think Rick Davis is right. I looked at this blow up and my first thought was, I think they're getting close to a deal. I mean, it's always darkest before the dawn. And, the truth is that the right people are in the room on this. And, Chris Murphy is the right Democrat. Kirsten Sinema, former Democrat, now an independent. She's the right person in the room. The Republicans there, Langford and others, like they're the right people. And this feels like something is going to get done. And, you know, I think Schumer probably feels this way as well. I just want to say, though, on the border that, look, Republicans have always had an advantage on this issue because if nothing gets done, if there's chaos at the border, it benefits Republicans politically. And that's been the way it's been for over 20 years now. So they get to play a stronger hand on this and, you know, force Democratic concessions because walking away bears very little price for them. But I'm fairly optimistic that we're going to get something done, more so than I was 48 hours ago.
Does it include actual asylum law change, Jim?
My guess is there will be some asylum law changes. I mean, there's plenty of Democrats who agree that there needs to be some changes to asylum, and you need to create a system that is, you know, fair, fast, and final with asylum, but it has to be fair and it has to be, you know, a coherent, fast system. It can't be a complete closed door, which some Republicans want. Asylum is legit, but it does need reforms.
I hope people appreciate what we have going here on this program. These are two individuals in Jim and Rick who have actually been in the room for these kind of negotiations. You can find a lot of places where we'll have a panel scream at each other and get nowhere, but these are the real insights. And if both of them tell us that we might be on the verge of something, this is an important moment here. We're going to continue on with the panel, by the way. We've got a big debate tomorrow night. We'll hit the campaign trail next with Jim Kessler and Rick Davis. First, world and national news with Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. The Israel-Hamas war continues, with Israel intensifying the bombing of areas around Gaza's second-largest city, Khan Yunis. At a briefing earlier today, IDF spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht confirmed that the Israeli military has widened its offensive into southern Gaza, saying they're targeting operatives, infrastructure, and the tunnel network.
So far, we have located over 800 tunnel shafts and destroyed 500 of these. The level of fortification is unprecedented.
Lieutenant Colonel Hecht says they've been focusing on reducing the harm to civilians, with soldiers on the ground going building to building. The presidents of Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania are promising to increase security on campus and provide more counseling for students to combat hate crimes and harassment. They've been testifying before the House Education Committee today, but student Talia Khan says that's not what she's seeing.
I am the proud president of the MIT-Israel Alliance, and I am a Jewish student currently immersed in an extremely toxic anti-Semitic atmosphere at MIT.
A study released last week by the Anti-Defamation League and Hillel International found 73% of Jewish college students have experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism. Global news 24 hours a day. I'm Nancy Lyons.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. Here at Bloomberg, we have got the Dow lower, S&P lower, NASDAQ Composite Index is advancing now up 20 points, gain there of just about 0.1%. S&P down 5, a decline of down by about 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.8%, 72.45 a barrel, and Bitcoin right now at 43,882 on Bitcoin. Treasuries resume their rally as further labor market slowdown reinforce speculation that the Fed will be able to cut rates next year to prevent a recession. The numbers on the U.S. economy continue to seesaw as we hear from Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Job openings dropped in October to the lowest since March 2021. Further evidence America's labor market is losing steam. The decline was across sectors. Consumer spending could slow as employers scale back. Just the same, service industries, the largest segment of America's business economy, grew at a faster pace in November. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Lazard's new CEO, Peter Orszag, says the company plans to expand its number of managing directors by 10 per year as it pursues its strategy to double revenue by 2030. Orszag took over as CEO in October. Lazard shares down now by 2.2%. Again, recapping, we have got stocks trading mixed. S&P and the Dow, they are both lower. NASDAQ higher, S&P down by 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, the stage is set for the big show tomorrow night in Tuscaloosa. It's the next, and at least for now, only scheduled debate left here for the Republican presidential candidates. Down to 4, and the RNC did make the lineup official last night. Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Chris Christie, who we kept hearing was not going to make the debate stage. Let's get into it with our political panel today. Rick Davis is here, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, and Democratic strategist. Jim Kessler from Third Way with us for the hour. Great to have both of you with us.
Beg of you, make me relevant in New Hampshire. And his entire debate, maybe only to influence the governor, Chris Sununu, who is still got an ability to endorse somebody. You know, does he endorse Chris Christie or does he endorse Nikki Haley? And this is his last chance to convince Governor Sununu that he's the guy who needs that. Nikki Haley, she seems to have turned her attention to Iowa. Why? Well, in Iowa, that'll help her in New Hampshire.
Well, Jim Kessler, I don't know how that's going to make Joe Lieberman feel, and I'm not bringing this up just to upset you, but Nikki Haley's getting a lot of attention, not just from folks like me who are asking questions about her quote-unquote surge in the polls, knowing she's still trailing Donald Trump by a lot. But we just heard from Joe Lieberman that she might make a good no-labels candidate. He talked about this with Neil Cavuto on Fox Business. Here's what the former senator who's involved in the no-labels idea, if we can call it that, had to say. Let's listen.
I haven't talked to her at all about this, but it is true that some of our big supporters know her well, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're talking with her. But honestly, she's totally focused on the Republican primary campaign, and right now she seems to be doing pretty well.
Haley could have
struggling to find a candidate. They're struggling to find a Democratic candidate. They're struggling to find a Republican candidate for one very simple reason. There is no circumstance on planet Earth in which they could possibly win a presidential election as a third-party candidate. Their only hope is to win a state or two, deny anyone 270 electoral college votes, get this thrown to the House of
the 2024 election, if he's the nominee, it's a clear field for somebody like her. Why would she invest her entire political reputation in a third way that at best, according to Joe Lieberman, who I absolutely adore, is going to be on 15 ballots. And as Jim says, they'll be lucky to win one state. So I don't know. I mean, that just doesn't seem like a very good value proposition. And I was squinting. If you're not watching us on YouTube,
there's a pressure campaign for him to get out. It's time to coalesce around a leader. The headline, some Republicans have a blunt message for Christie: drop out. They talked to a Republican strategist named Sarah Longwell, who says time is a flat circle. I love this quote. And everyone insists we relive beat for beat the 2016 election. The main thing Chris Christie could do to make a difference this time is to drop out. Is she right, Jim?
Sarah Longwell is one of the smartest people in politics. Look, yes or no on that question. If Nikki Haley finishes second in Iowa, and Chris Christie is not going to be a factor in Iowa, she will finish first in New Hampshire, and she's going to finish first in South Carolina, and it will be a two-person race awfully quick. So, look, there's no path for Chris.
Today on Bloomberg Sound On, fascinating conversation on the fastest show in politics. Coming up, some final thoughts from Rick and Jim on impeachment. You know, we're getting there. In fact, House Republicans likely to formalize an impeachment inquiry next week. Reaction today from Senator John Fetterman. You might not be surprised. This is something Joe Biden should be worried about. We'll do that next on Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
News headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Goldman Sachs will probably see compensation costs climb by a percentage in the low single digits, even as the bank is set to post another year of slumping profits. Chief Financial Officer Dennis Coleman issued the forecast at the firm's financials conference. The Wall Street Journal will continue to pay based on the performance of its business lines in a year. Will in the future. And with more on the story, here's Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
Charlie, speaking at the Goldman Sachs U.S. Financial Services Conference, Sharp said, quote, the asset cap today is not a material limitation just because of where the trends in deposits and where loan demand is. America's fourth largest bank has been hobbled by a Fed order limiting it to its size at the end of 2017 for more than 5 years. That's longer than Sharp's tenure. The punishment is tied to a series of scandals at the bank that began with fake accounts 7 years ago. Last month, Bloomberg News reported that Wells Fargo executives privately expect the restriction to stretch into 2025. Now, separately, Sharp also said the economy is stronger than expected. Charlie?
And that's Tom Busby reporting Wells Fargo down 1.3%. Those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
Is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
We're live from Washington, where we'll have some final thoughts ahead on the prospect of impeachment from Rick Davis and Jim Kessler. First, world and national news. Let's get you up to date now with Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
After every tunnel, every commander, because the goal of this war is to totally destroy Hamas, total victory over the terror organization that perpetrated the October 7th massacre.
Levy says Israeli troops are being more precise as they widen the offensive into southern Gaza. Campus protests over the Israel-Hamas war are in focus today on Capitol Hill. The presidents of Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania have been testifying before a House committee on rising anti-Semitism on their campuses. Harvard President Claudine Gay says acts of anti-Jewish hate and Islamophobia have been on the rise since October 7th.
We have increased security measures, expanded reporting channels, and augmented counseling, mental health, and support services. We have reiterated that speech that incites violence, threatens safety, or violates Harvard's policies against bullying and harassment is unacceptable.
Prominent alumni and donors to all three institutions have criticized campus leadership for their response to the protests. A big meeting is set for this afternoon with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It was set up by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's planning a procedural vote on a foreign aid spending bill tomorrow.
Tomorrow's vote will fail, says Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, as Senate Republicans insist on a deal on border measures before agreeing to end debate on the $106 billion supplemental funding request. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy accuses Republicans of refusing to compromise, saying that talks stopped on Friday. Ukraine President Zelensky was asked to address senators via remote during a classified briefing today so they can hear, in Schumer's words, precisely what's at stake in this vote. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Back to you, Joe.
Right, Nancy, we're hearing the word impeachment grow a bit louder again now that we're kind of getting into the real debate over the supplemental funding request, this idea of maybe even funding the government, avoiding a shutdown in January, February. All of that will have to happen, if it does happen, at the same time, it seems, as an impeachment inquiry. The committees in charge here, Judiciary, Ways and Means Oversight in the House. Remember, this goes back to the olden days when Kevin McCarthy was Speaker. Out with an interim staff report on the Hunter Biden investigation, no smoking gun. But House Republicans are likely to vote next week to formalize an impeachment inquiry. There was reaction today from Senator John Fetterman, asked about it on CNN, of course, a Democrat from Pennsylvania.
Oh, no, please don't impeach him. Oh, my God, that bad man, it's so scary. Oh, no. But whatever a weirdo, says about that, it's like, go ahead.
A weirdo says about that. Rick Davis and Jim Kessler, I'm sure, have some ideas on this too. Rick, are we really doing this?
Well, it is nice to see Senator Fetterman in such number of Republicans say that they'll be happy to move the investigation forward, but when it comes to articles of impeachment, if there's nothing tangible, they're not voting for it. So this could be the kind of thing that, you know, does move forward initially, but then stops dead in its trail when it's time to get serious.
Jim, I'm totally out of time, so I'm going to try to ask you a yes or no question. Would it actually help Democrats? Does it help Joe Biden?
Yes.
I knew he was going to do that for me. Thank you for playing along. Jim Kessler, Rick Davis, great answers, great analysis, and smart talk today on the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Hour 2 of Sound On starts now. Top for money, but will I have to wait for the border? Welcome to Hour 2 of Bloomberg Sound On as top officials from Kyiv visit senators today in Washington with President Zelensky on Zoom, even as negotiations ride on a border deal. We'll dig into the process with a voice of experience today. Former Florida Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, former member of the January 6th committee, is with us back at the table today in Washington. College presidents are being grilled on Capitol Hill today over anti-Semitism on campus. We'll talk about that with Wendy Benjaminson, Bloomberg Washington senior editor, and we'll compare notes later with Bloomberg's Billy House on another high-profile retirement in the House of Representatives. It's all after a look at Wall Street. We'll bring you up to date on trading right now with Charlie Pellet in New York.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. We're looking at a mixed market here with the Dow, the S&P lower. NASDAQ continues to push. Now that is a gain for NASDAQ of just about 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 index, we'll call it unchanged, up by less than half a point. S&P down 6 right now, drop there of 0.1%. Dow Industrial is down 85, a decline right now of about 0.2%. 10-year yield, 4.17%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.58%. Spot gold lower by $11 the ounce to 2017, drop of 0.6%, while West Texas Intermediate crude is down 61 cents a barrel, 72.43 on WTI, lower now by about 0.8%. We do have Bitcoin moving higher today. Right now we have Bitcoin up by 3.8%, 43,645 right now on Bitcoin. Well, as for the Federal Reserve,
to show continued improvement, and then the question is, what will the Fed do at that juncture when it's going into election? That I don't know.
And you can hear more of the conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. CVS Health plans to change how its more than 9,000 pharmacies get paid with a new reimbursement model designed to simplify drug pricing. CVS reported earnings this morning. Shares are up 4.2%. Rival Walgreens Boots Alliance trading lower by 1.2%. Again, recapping, stocks are mixed. S&P down 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Right, Charlie, thank you. Welcome to Hour 2 of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we do have breaking news today. It emerged in the last hour. To move military promotions as soon as possible. It's not all of them, though. Tuberville says he's lifting the hold on all promotions shy of 4-star generals. And we're trying to get our heads around the logic there. But this is moving as we have a grand debate over border security underway here. A big ask on Ukraine, as we talked about earlier. President Zelensky speaking remotely with senators in a classified all-senators briefing today. And we have a lot to talk about with Stephanie Murphy, the former Congresswoman from Florida, is with us, who, of course, served on the January 6th committee, back with us at the table today in Washington. Welcome back to the Capitol. It's lovely to have you.
It's great to
be with you. And it's good to see you. I didn't think I'd be talking to you about Tommy Tuberville today. I know that you have a background at the Defense Department, and it's something we discussed before in a state, of course, that you represented, teeming with veterans and active members of the military. Why would you stop at 4 stars? Do you get that?
I don't actually get it, and I think it's incredibly damaging to our department, but also to our national security. We are in a situation where we have a ground war in Europe. We have war in the Middle East. We need leadership in those posts like yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I've never really understood why he wanted to hold those things up, putting our national security at jeopardy for his own personal political motives.
Well, even when we asked him here at Bloomberg, he seemed to kind of resent the upper ranks of the military as being elitist, as relying on staff. They don't do a lot. They didn't get a lot done anyway. He was quoted as saying, never mind the whole wokeism and all of that. Is that what this is, some kind of poke at elitism in the military?
You know, if you work at the Department of Defense, you know that the general officers and the flag officers provide incredible leadership. And our system of leadership in our military is the advantage that we have over a lot of our adversaries.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you look at the Russian war, like, they talk about how Russia's army is basically failing because they don't have good military leadership. So I don't think that he's right in criticizing our flag and general officer ranks. They provide important role in
holding up or being lifted, but maybe this leads to him to stand down altogether. Will Republicans be the ones to make that happen?
I certainly hope so. Republicans for so long have wrapped themselves in the American flag. Supposedly the people who support the military, support law enforcement, are supposed to be strong on national security. For them to have somebody who's never served in uniform, might I add, stand in the way of these confirmations is really kind of shameful. I'm glad that they finally applied enough pressure on him that he's slowed down and allow the 4 stars to get confirmed as well.
It's pretty remarkable how long this has been going on for. There's a lot more to talk about, as I mentioned here. And boy, it must be days like these you miss the job. I say that sarcastically because we've got a lot on the line, and it's riding on a deal on border security. We spent the last hour with Jim Kessler and Rick Davis, who both were encouraged by some of the rhetoric, the frustration, the exasperation that we're hearing from members on both sides, suggesting that that is usually a darkest before dawn kind of moment here. What are you hearing from your former colleagues, and having been in the middle of this yourself, are we capable of doing this right now?
Well, the Congress is so narrowly held, both in the Senate and in the House, and the House has demonstrated that it is quite chaotic, this Congress. So is it capable of anything?
We can't even figure out how to fund the government.
That's right. And they've kicked that can down the road into next year, but they're really trying to focus on this supplemental that addresses Israel and Indo-Pacific, as well as Ukraine and border security. But you have to have people who are willing to negotiate and to get to yes. And my understanding is over the weekend, the Republicans doubled down on positions that just aren't going to be palatable and aren't in a place of moving off of those or even trying to find common ground. Hopefully, as we get closer to the day that they get to leave for the holiday, that will create some pressure and get people in a more positive mood and maybe willing to negotiate.
So what's the fault line for Democrats? Because we're hearing from members, particularly those who might be up for re-election, that they might be open to changes to asylum law, changes to parole that allow the president to make humanitarian exceptions might be a bridge too far. Where are the fault lines in this?
You know, I think any changes in the policy has to also begin with bolstering our actual border security. So none of the programs that we have in place for people to seek asylum or legal status in the United States really work unless we actually know who's coming in and out. And so that's really the first line that they have to be able to agree on, is that some amount of resources for border security. And then we can look at changing our programs and creating legal pathways, whether that's asylum or an expanded visa program. And, we're really starting to talk about maybe a little more comprehensive immigration reform that has all of those key elements. But
Which would be
don't have enough
remarkable.
time for that.
We've been waiting a generation for that to
Yeah.
happen. There was a quote from John Cornyn that jumped off the page to me in a conversation with NBC News. This is not a traditional negotiation. This is a price that has to be paid in order to get the supplemental, which sounds like extortion.
This is something that happens in Washington all the time when there is broad bipartisan support, as there is for Ukraine funding or Israel funding. It becomes a leverage point for something that has a little less support and is a little more difficult. And I think that's why you see the supplemental funding lumped together with border security.
Well, so maybe this is an opportunity, though. Maybe, I don't know if you're optimistic about this or not. Do we flip this around and say that this is, in fact, an opportunity to finally unlock an agreement on border funding because of the urgency behind Ukraine and Israel?
I certainly hope so. I'm an optimist, and I think that maybe one of the interesting outcomes of having such narrowly held Congresses and divided government is a push to more bipartisanship, because you can't get it done with just one party anymore.
Sure, right. Wouldn't Democrats love to go on the trail this year, though, and say, hey, we helped to solve the border crisis?
I think they need to.
Okay.
The president needs this. He needs to not only be able to have a win as it relates to foreign policy and national security, but also domestic border security.
Your governor in Florida certainly talks about it a lot.
He sure does.
Would that take the teeth out of that argument for Joe Biden, even in the presidential campaign trail? Because he'll have to face this one way or the other.
I think it would defang at least one of the attack lines against him. I think the American people feel both some economic insecurity as well as some physical insecurity, and this would at least address the physical security part in some measure if they felt like we were addressing the border security issues.
Do you believe the administration that Ukraine is out of money, that we're out of time?
I believe that Congress likes to test those deadlines. When
would you test that if you were still there?
I'm not sure I would, but I'm somebody who believes in supporting our allies and fighting against authoritarians. But that's what, Congress works best when it has a deadline, and they've put that deadline out at the end of the year. Hopefully they can clear this out of the way so that when they come back from the holiday break, they can focus on appropriations and funding the government.
That would be a concept, actual spending bills. Congresswoman, how dare you? We're spending time with Stephanie Murphy, the former Congresswoman from Florida. Mike Johnson speaking today, the Speaker of the House, about the January 6th committee. And I thought, okay, well, we need to get the Congresswoman's reaction to this. I don't know if you heard what he said, but a couple of days ago, he decided to release all of the security footage from January 6th. Today, he implied that more needs to be done to obscure the faces of the rioters before the rest is released, so they are not somehow targeted by DO. To say this about the work of the committee, this is literally just a couple of hours ago, Speaker Mike Johnson.
I think the January 6th committee was a partisan exercise. They claim that it was bipartisan, but I think we all recognize that the two Republican members that
tried to help overturn the 2020 election results in writing that amicus brief on the Texas case. What is he trying to do here?
It's really deeply disappointing that the Speaker of the House is trying to shield people who actually attacked the House and the Capitol physically on January 6th. But it isn't surprising. As you said, he was a part of one of the efforts to overturn the outcome of a free and fair election. But it should underscore for Americans the importance of this coming election. Imagine if on January 6th we have a Speaker Johnson with the gavel and he's able to delay the certification of presidential, which was what they tried to do on January 6th. The purpose was to delay the certification. I think we'd be as a democracy. And so, we are seeing signs all over the place how important this next election is. And I know everybody always says this is the most important election.
Every 4 years.
Every 4 years. But I honestly
Does it get more important every 4 years? Is that why?
Well, when we're looking at the possibility of walking ourselves into electing a dictator or somebody who intends to use authoritarian means to govern. I believe the former president when he says he will seek retribution, when he lives up to the things that he promises that he's going to do. And so I think that's a really dangerous situation to put our democracy in.
You think re-electing Donald Trump is electing a dictator?
He has made statements about how he plans on using his power, about how he plans on changing the Department of Justice, about how he plans on going after political opponents.
It meets that definition. To overstay his term. She said 100% yes, that if he is reelected, he will try to hold on to power as long as possible and never leave the White House. Do you agree with that?
You might remember that the former president remarked in awe at President Xi's ability to make himself, stay in power
It's part
forever.
of the stump speech now.
Right. And so, and January 6th was an attempt to stay. The difference was that there were people involved who stood up to him, Republicans primarily, who wouldn't let their commitment to him override their commitment to this country. I'm not sure we'll be so patriotic thing to do. I love this country, and you fight hard in campaigns for your team to win, but when you don't, you accept the loss and you have a peaceful transfer of power. That's core to maintaining our democracy, is a peaceful transfer of power. And I couldn't believe that as somebody who had escaped a country that made political transitions through violence, that I found myself on January 6th hiding in the basement of the Capitol while my fellow Americans ransacked the building in an effort to overturn the elections. So my service on January 6th was my patriotic duty to shed light on what happened and to ensure that it never happens again.
Incredible. I appreciate your answering that the way you did. Stephanie Murphy, the former Congresswoman, Democrat from Florida, thank you for always being with us when you come to Washington. It's great to see you again. I've had a great Thanksgiving. Happy New Year in advance if we don't see you before then, but we'll try to fix that. I'm Joe Matthew on the fastest show in politics. Stay with us here on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P lower, NASDAQ higher, NASDAQ 100 as well. S&P trading a little change, down 2.5 points right now. That is a drop of less than 0.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down now by 92 points, a decline of just about 0.25%. S&P down 2 points, as I mentioned, little change there. NASDAQ 100 index up 23, up by about 0.1%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 33 now, up by about 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.17%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.59%. 4.59 now on the 2-year. Treasuries resume their rally as a further labor market slow. Is alleging that low-cost retailer Dollar Tree and its software provider Zeroed In Technologies failed to protect the personal information of nearly 2 million people who was exposed in an August data breach. Dollar Tree down now by 0.4%. Again, recapping, stocks are mixed. S&P little change, down less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Not a very fun day in the classroom for the presidents of some of America's top universities today, including Harvard. This hearing underway on Capitol Hill that we told you about with the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and Penn. It had earlier, Claudine Gay of Harvard, again with her counterparts from Penn and MIT. Here's Stefanik and Gay in the hearing earlier today.
I will say again, that type of hateful speech is personally abhorrent to me.
Do you believe that type of hateful speech is contrary to Harvard's code of conduct, or is it allowed at Harvard?
It is at odds with the values of Harvard.
Can you
But
not
our
say here that it is
values
against the
also-
code of conduct at Harvard?
We embrace a commitment to free expression, even of views that are objectionable, offensive, hateful. It's when that speech crosses into conduct that violates our policies against bullying, harassment,
Does that speech
and
not
intimidation.
cross that barrier? Does that speech not call for the genocide of Jews and the elimination of Israel?
Instituting policies against threatening speech and squelching the freedom of speech on a university campus where one is supposed to be able to air all the views. So I don't envy being in the presidents of the university's shoes. On the other hand, right outside the hearing room, as our field producer Tyler Kendall was telling us, it was incredibly angry and like pre-fight pushing and stuff like that from pro-Palestinian in terms of collecting other alumni donations and giving them, they are down to $1 donations in protest. And then while this hearing was going on, a group of UPenn students sued the university in a Philadelphia court for not doing enough to protect them on campus. So it's just a very, very tense and difficult. This is almost the culmination of what's been happening on campuses for a while.
Yes.
As a lot of views are being heard, the word you didn't always be heard on campuses.
Listen to Penn's Liz McGill. Everyone has their own approach here and how she interacted with lawmakers today. This is from opening remarks.
Anti-Semitism, an old, viral, and pernicious evil, has been steadily rising in our society, and these world events have dramatically accelerated that surge. Few places have proven immune, including Philadelphia and campuses like ours. This is unacceptable. We immediately investigate any hateful act, cooperating with both law enforcement and the FBI, where we have identified individuals who have committed these acts in violation of either policy or law. We initiate disciplinary proceedings and engage law enforcement.
go there, and then of course the federal government pulling back on any largesse they give the university. So yes, I think here's what I'm going to do about it is a better response.
100%. We'll see what comes, if anything, of this hearing and talk about it with our pal Wendy Benjaminson. But it's a debate we're looking forward to tomorrow night. We got the lineup, only 4 this time.
Right.
I had to this is terrible. I had to stop and think. Well, wait, who else was there? Was Tim Scott?
Was Tim Scott the last time? Right.
That makes a difference for any of these 4. It's going to be DeSantis, Haley, Christie, Ramaswamy.
Right.
What's the strategy for any of them? Is this? I mean, who's watching? Does it matter? This is the big race for second. Big deal, right?
Right,
well, what's
exactly.
It come to here?
Our colleague Philip Bump in the Washington Post, somebody else. Nikki Haley is doing well in New Hampshire. There is a lot of discomfort among, Republicans with Donald Trump.
Yep.
And so if they are looking for an alternative, okay, our chart shows Haley has 10% to Donald Trump's 61. Oof. Maybe there's 2028 after all.
Yeah, and that's nationally, realizing she's doing better in New Hampshire.
She is doing better.
But, Alan Lichtman was calling us out on Balance of Power last evening for being part of essentially a media narrative, that this is some media narrative that there's no real difference between what Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are doing. They're both losing badly to Donald Trump.
Well, at the moment they are, but he does have a point that let's see what happens when the votes are taken.
Yes, but do you qualify momentum as a real thing? Because that's what we're talking about here.
Well, yeah, I mean, momentum works until it doesn't, right?
Sure.
I mean, he has whose primary goal is to stop Donald Trump from coming back to the White House. And it doesn't really matter to them who it is as long as it's not Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie Dimon was suggesting that even Democrats give to Nikki Haley. And I think Reid Hoffman today gave to Nikki Haley $250,000. That's not chump change. And so, yes, I guess she does have momentum. The question is, will it be enough to beat him in a significant state? Right. Of course, right after New Hampshire for the Republicans is South Carolina, her home state. And
a chance to...
Right, exactly. With Tim Scott out of the running, he was the South Carolina senator. It could be that South Carolinians will come around for her. On the other hand, he got tremendously cheered at a stadium in South Carolina a couple weeks ago.
I have to ask you, Wendy, while you're with us, about whether young people are showing up. This new youth vote poll, they've basically ruled out both of these old guys as they see it.
They are
but
what
if
we
you're
call
looking
double
at,
haters.
That's right.
Yeah,
okay. If you're looking at 18 to 30-year-olds, though, that's coming out of Joe Biden's side, if anywhere, isn't it?
It is largely coming out of Joe Biden's side. I'm sure there are young people who support Donald Trump, but yes, mostly the reason they turned out so much in 2016 and 2020. Well, first, let's start at the beginning. They turned out incredibly in 2008 to elect Barack Obama because that was going to be part of history, and it's fun to be part of history. Right. But 2016 and 2020, it was an anti-Trump movement, and Biden seemed like their kind of guy, and he promised a lot of things on climate and student loans and all these things. Well, here we are 4 years later, and the bill has come due, and we have an 81-year-old Democratic president and a 78-year-old likely challenger, and people 18 to 30, I mean, these guys are their grandparents' age. They just don't see politics the same way. They don't see the world the same way. They've grown up in a completely different world than these guys did. And so, yes, I think their thought is, forget it, I'll just stay home, which is terrible because we need their voices.
We'll see where we are, I guess, in 6 months to a year. But the bill has come due, boy, and Wendy has receipts. It's great to see you, as always. Wendy Benjaminson, Bloomberg Washington senior editor. Let's get you up to date now on world and national news. Nancy Lyons helps us with that from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. Senator Tommy Tuberville says he is ending his blockade of hundreds of military promotions following heavy criticism from many of his colleagues in the Senate. He confirmed his decision when taking questions from reporters this afternoon.
I'm releasing everybody. I still got a hold on, I think, 11.
Dealing with multiple threats to our national security. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has more on Wray's testimony today before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Ray said he's not previously seen so many threats elevated at the same time, from Russian cyber attacks and cyber crimes to China's supply of chemicals for fentanyl and methamphetamines to Iran.
Iran has tried to assassinate a former U.S. national security advisor on U.S. soil, has tried to kidnap a journalist smack in the middle of New York City, has conducted a cyber attack on a children's hospital in New England, and tried to interfere in the last presidential election.
Ray said foreign terrorist organizations have stepped up their attacks on American interests since Hamas invaded Israel. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Little change and lower for the S&P 500 index. Right now down 5 points. That is a drop of just about 0.2%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 105, decline there of 0.3%. NASDAQ 100 index higher by 4 points. Little change. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 19, a gain right now of 0.1%. Treasuries resume their rally as further labor market slowdown reinforced speculation that the Fed will be able to cut rates next year to prevent a recession. 10-year yield at 4.17% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.59%. Gold is down $11.
Lower by a whole lot. I just don't see that happening in the absence of an enormous recession. And if we get an enormous recession, that is not good news for stocks.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Lazard's new CEO, Peter Orszag, says the company plans to expand its number of managing directors by 10 per year as it pursues its strategy to double revenue by 2030. Orszag took over as CEO in October. Lazard shares down less than 1%.
Today on Capitol Hill that might not make the front page, and it's been so busy we haven't spoken about it yet. The man who actually held the speaker's gavel a couple of weeks ago just today announced his retirement. He's out. He's done. I'm not talking about Kevin McCarthy, although we're waiting on that one. The man who slammed the gavel. Yes, if you're watching on YouTube, that's Patrick McHenry, right? A big voice around here at Bloomberg as chair of the House Financial Services Committee, an important and influential member of Republican leadership in the House. He helped to negotiate the debt ceiling deal. It's supposed to solve all of the crypto industry's problems, and maybe he will, but his time will be shorter than some expected. Patrick McHenry, you can read about it on the terminal, with the help of Billy House. Congressional crypto ally Patrick McHenry announces retirement. You know, Billy in the House is with us right now from the House of Representatives. Reporter. Am I the only one surprised by this, Billy? What's going on here? Does he not like Mike Johnson?
Well, he was very angry over how the House generally behaved with his close friend Kevin McCarthy, and that might have had some role in it. He expressed great disappointment and with the ouster of the former speaker, and of course he was then named to be the temporary replacement for 3 weeks. In that time, he grew even more frustrated over some of the actions by basically the far right of the conference.
You can speak, Billy, to what a great number of retirements we have now. I think we're over 30. Is this one of the most high profile? How would you categorize it?
Oh, I would say it's one of the most high profile. Now there's rumblings of even a McCarthy decision soon. That has not been confirmed and is certainly not true. But yes, there have been dozens, roughly 3 dozen. There have been years when there's been this many, but it's some of the shakeup of the districts in local state legislatures. It's been the tone of Congress, some believe, that have chased some people off.
On stablecoin legislation and on broader crypto industry reform legislation. Not a fan of Gary Gensler, and he's really been kind of the face of that conservative movement on the Hill. What happens to it after he's gone?
Well, absolutely. I mean, basically, he has played a leading role in defining what is the crypto industry and how the government should interact, and if it does at all. And now he was going to be term limited as chairman of the Financial Services Committee at the end of 2024 anyhow, so he would have left that committee, but he certainly would have been, if he stayed in Congress, a big voice as either a chairman emeritus or just a member. There are other big voices. Tom Emmer, who's now the majority leader, is on that committee and also heavily involved in the crypto industry. But sure, this is a big,
retires, will they?
Likely not. And that definitely will be what he's remembered for, but probably number one thing he'll be remembered for is being the temporary speaker who, while the rules weren't really ironed out, did not overreach while he helped the House get through that troubled time.
That means for producer Sam, we have a very limited window here now for use of the gavel slam video for our viewers on YouTube because it's epic. I still feel like, I don't know, the moment right there. I'm not even kidding, Billy. The anger that he showed in slamming that gavel, knowing the new reality that was the House of Representatives, I wonder if he decided right at that moment if he was done.
Very possible. And he's also has expressed concerns about being to the extent he has had to be. But no, I think that was a defining moment. And you know what? The current speaker, Mike Johnson, is already running into similar antagonism from the far right. And maybe he's seeing the writing on the wall for how this particular Republican majority just won't work.
Does Congressman French Hill, familiar voice on Bloomberg, become the new chair possibly of financial services if Republicans keep the House?
Absolutely. He will be a leading candidate from Arkansas. That's his background. He's people have leapfrogged in seniority, but he's got seniority, and that is a name and a person to watch, definitely.
Spending time with Bloomberg congressional reporter Billy House. I don't know if this departure impacts leadership now. Will it have an impact at all on the debate going forward when it comes to funding, or simply not running for re-election means we'll have this all solved before then?
It's hard to say. One thing it will mean, though, is there will be at least one fewer bow tie wearing lawmakers in the U.S. House.
You know, bow tie wearing, but still a young man. I was floored. Hair though, or something. It's like he's got the Steve Martin effect. People assume he's much older than that. The guy runs every day. He's in impeccable health. What does he do next, Billy? Make money?
Oh yeah, he's going to make big money. The inroads and the connections and the expertise he's developed in Congress and the financial industry leaves a lot of doors open for him.
Well, read about it, like I said, on the terminal and at Bloomberg.com. They've put it together here, and if you're into crypto, this is important for you because the Congressional Crypto Ally, as Billy puts it, is leaving the building, announcing his retirement. Great conversation with Billy House. We always learn something when we go to the Hill to find Billy in the house. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington on a breaking news day. My God, think of the ground that we have covered just in the last 2 hours here, and more will follow. Slam that gavel and join us on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Global News.
benchmarks came today at the Goldman Sachs U.S. Financial Services Conference. Bank of America shares trading lower now by just about 0.9%. Robinhood shares rallying by more than 8% after the online brokerage said November crypto notional trading volumes were about 75% above October levels. Meanwhile, exchange-traded funds managed by Cathie Wood's ARK Investment Management bought 14,700 shares of Robinhood, according to an update. CVS Health plans to change how its more than 9,000 pharmacies get paid. With more on that story, here's Bloomberg's Steve Rappaport.
Charlie, the biggest U.S. drugstore chain, says it is aiming to make the payment system more transparent by using a formula based on the drug's cost, a fixed markup, and a fee that reflects the value of the pharmacy services. Critics have long expressed concern about the lack of transparency in drug pricing and have accused companies that manage pharmacy benefits of inflating healthcare costs. CVS's step signals that the industry is moving away from the traditional complex pricing model and towards the cost-plus approach, introduced by billionaire Mark Cuban at his pharmacy company. Cigna Group's Express Scripts, the country's second-largest prescription drug benefits manager, last month announced a similar cost-based model to start next year.
Very important update on the Ukraine pitch that's happening today. As I mentioned earlier, top brass from Kyiv in town on Capitol Hill. And we'll have more on that straight ahead after we bring you up to date on world and national news. For that, we turn to Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom. Hi, Nancy.
Hey, Joe. Senator Tommy Tuberville is lifting his holds on military promotions except for four-star generals. It's a move that will allow 400 officers to finally be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Speaking to reporters outside the Capitol, Senator Tuberville said nobody won.
It was pretty much a draw. I mean, they didn't get what they wanted, we didn't get what we wanted, and you know, when you change the rules, it's hard to win.
Tuberville had been coming under increasing pressure from lawmakers in both parties to end his months-long blockade. It was
shutdown protest language are in effect arguing for a speech code. But in practice, speech codes do not work. Problematic speech needs to be countered with other speech and with education. And we are doing that.
MIT's Sally Kornbluth says they're increasing conversations on campus. The subcommittee chair, Republican Congresswoman Virginia Fox, blames the surging campus anti-Semitism on, quote, the race-based ideology of the radical left. The ranking member of the subcommittee, Congressman Bobby Scott, calling for action, then failing to fund civil rights agencies that are responsible for addressing hate speech. Well, as you've been hearing here on Bloomberg, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this afternoon will be appealing directly to U.S. senators ahead of a vote this week on funding Ukraine's war with Russia. He'll be making a Zoom call with lawmakers. The Biden administration
stories from Bloomberg in audio form and all the latest headlines at the click of a button with Bloomberg News Now, all as you're driving to work or home. You'd want that, right? You'd probably ask me how much that might cost. And the great thing is it's free. With our sponsor, Interactive Brokers, when you download the new Bloomberg Business app, that's exactly what happens. Coming out of your dashboard with either Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. I know you've got to do one or the other here. It gives you access to everything I just mentioned, all on your phone while briefing that is set to begin in about 2 minutes here. The Ukrainian president was set to speak via Zoom in an address or even a back and forth that was arranged by the White House, with all senators gathering today in Washington to consider the idea of Ukraine funding, just a day after the White House told us that we were out of money and out of time, and certainly will be by the end of the year. So the full court press happening today, the last ditch, whatever you want to call it, dispatching top leaders. Zelensky's chief of staff is here in Washington, the Minister of Defense, the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, all on the Hill to ask for this supplemental budget request, the $60 billion that the president put forth. And Zelensky was going to make the case as well, call him up on Zoom to close the deal, and that will apparently not be happening. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
You American America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And very good afternoon, everybody. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week for this Tuesday, December 5th, 2023. 2023?
Yeah, you can say that. We only got a few more weeks of the year, so you can do whatever you want.
That's so true. Out and soon in with
That's great.
And soon in with
That's crazy.
2024. Speaking of that, the Treasury rally is back. We'll see whether or not that continues into 2024. But today, it is, thank you very much, an elected soft labor report.
Yeah, Jolt's kind of jolted down, which surprised a lot of people.
Below 9 million.
Lowest number we've seen in a couple of years.
Yeah, so
it's a big deal.
Yeah, we're going to get to the data and the trade in just a moment. I mentioned 2024. We're going to talk about what's ahead in technology in 2024. IDC President Crawford Del Prete will be stopping by. Curious how many times we say AI. Maybe it'll be a drinking game, Tom.
Tom. No, my dad's on vacation, okay?
I don't know why I am stuck
It could be
on
worse.
that.
It could be worse. That's okay.
Hi,
Hey,
Tom, but I love your son, Tim.
well, you know what? We got a great guest coming up a little bit later in the program. We're going to have some time with Ori Levine. He's back in the house. He's the co-founder of Waze. He's built another billion-dollar tech company as well that he sold back in 2020. He's going to talk to us about the impact of the Israel-Hamas war on the tech community in Israel, a place where he built both of his companies.
Yeah, he wasn't a member of the Israeli military forces, so I'm sure, and he's also, homeland.
Yeah.
So it'll be a very interesting perspective, and I'm sure very personal. Plus, the story on our editorial team radar, they have deemed it a must-read for everybody. It's about concern about the nation's drug supply reaching the point that big hospitals and defense
They're trying. Bloomberg Intelligence is going to be joining us to talk a little bit about what happens to charging if people aren't buying EVs.
Yeah, right. You need chargers if you're buying EVs.
makes
If you're
sense.
not buying EVs, you don't need chargers. All right, to the markets we go again. It's a Treasury trade we're focused on. Countdown to the close starts right now.
Countdown to the close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. Romaine Bostic.
Should we have a meeting?
Job market. Having said that, you know what we don't say yay about is meetings. And it turns out Salesforce, Slack, Technologies found out that 2 hours is kind of the tipping point in terms of meeting. Anything after that, and like our productivity falls off.
Wait, 2 hours like in total or 2 hours?
2 hours in total daily, although I got to say.
Can you imagine a 2-hour meeting?
2 hours of meetings daily to me is a lot.
Yeah, my eyes are glazing over just thinking about it.
Well, it turns out if you spend over 2 hours in meetings each day, you to not have meetings because time is money. I used to work for a company that like over 10 years ago did this. There were signs up in every room that said, you know, the average meeting, half-hour meeting costs this much money. Do you really need to be here right now?
Yeah.
That company didn't end up doing very well.
Oh, there you go. Correlation is causation, apparently here. On a somewhat related note, though somewhat unrelated as well, I just found out, did you know that some Dunkin' Donuts actually have conference rooms that you can rent out?
I had no idea.
Yeah, I just found this out the other
Do you get donuts if you rent out the conference?
Only if you stay for more than 2 hours.
You know, that's really interesting.
So many questions about this.
Yes.
It's like...
why? Like, why?
Because people are trying to work everywhere they are, you know?
Meetings, Scarlett. There's always a meeting, and you need a place to have a meeting.
Yeah, I'm allergic to meetings. They can work where they're not relying on credentials. They're looking more at your skills and your capabilities. And it's one way of testing.
Or see what you can do under pressure, right? Like you've got a week. What can you come up with?
A week?
Well,
I mean, I've been on job interviews where they give you something like and say, okay, you have an hour to figure this out.
How
and then
many
you can go
jelly
home
beans are in
back
this
to your
jar?
life. But you're telling me that when I leave, I have to spend 2 weeks working on your work?
Yeah, but it actually brings up real issues. And Carol and I were talking about this a little earlier, that perhaps the labor market is softening a little bit. If companies are, really out there looking for talent all around the country, are they really going to make applicants jump through these types of hoops in order to find the right talent? There are some downsides to doing this. Like if people, have a job already or they're taking care of a family, like are they really going to be able to spend a week doing a, C++ programming project just to apply to a job if they can?
And maybe get some free work done.
But then the folks who can't do it don't end up applying to that job.
But
and the company misses out on that employee.
You might also lose out on some really good applicants who that given maybe a few weeks or a few months on the job could turn out to be a really great employee, even if they don't have the skills right there at the application process.
Did you guys take a test when you came to Bloomberg?
They put me in front of a microphone with a 4-box with you guys. Rehearse this.
Did they?
No, they didn't.
It is. This is his audition. People don't know.
This is an audition.
It's the ongoing audition.
It's been 3 years, but...
I think I had to do a writing test where I had to prove I could put together a sentence. And someone said, yes, you can write a sentence. Okay.
I had a test.
It was harder than that.
I had two tests. I had written and then I had an oral exam.
This meeting is over. It's already 2 hours.
Did we talk about that?
We did talk about that. All right, we're going to be back in less than an hour's time. Our cross-platform coverage covers the just talked about this a little bit. A report maybe kind of feels like tailor-made for the U.S. Central Bank, you might say.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Right?
Yeah.
Job openings, U.S. job openings pulling back in the month of October to the lowest level since early 2021, underscoring that gradual cooling in the labor market. Available positions, Tim, moving below that 9 million mark.
Yeah, it decreased to 8.7 million from a downwardly revised 9.4 million in the prior month. That figure was below all estimates of a Bloomberg survey of economists, and the decline was broad-based across sectors. As a result, we saw bond yields drop across the U.S. curve, the 10-year dropping to the lowest level since September 1st.
Yeah, we all sat up and took notice. Let's get to it, though, with Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Michael McKee. He was breaking it down here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. And also with us is Bloomberg Intelligence Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist Ira Jersey at BI headquarters in Princeton, New Jersey. Mike, I want to start with you.
Average for the 20 years before the pandemic was about 5.5 million. So we're still well above that in terms of job openings.
Perspective.
From the Fed's point of view, though, it's good because it's coming back down, and it suggests a little bit of tightening in the labor market is on its way. The other half of that is hires, and while they were a little slower at about 5.5 million, they're kind of in a range around that area, and that's still above.
For Friday's payrolls number from a weakened JOLTS survey.
You really can't because JOLTS is basically 2 months old. This was October data, and now we're getting the November payrolls numbers. So it's not going to tell you a whole lot. If you're going to infer anything, you could infer that it may show a slight decline in manufacturing jobs from the ISM surveys and an increase in service industry jobs, which we would expect. What I'm finding very interesting is that the Bloomberg survey of economists is now 187. That is down from 189 earlier today, but still, that's gone up this week. And there are a lot of people with numbers close to 200.
U.S. yield curve dipping again. What's notable about today's move, or is it just a resumption of what we've been seeing as of late, certainly in the month of November?
Yeah, I think before we had the data, I think that traders weren't trading on what was going on in Europe, so the U.S. was actually lagging a pretty big rally in Europe this morning. And then when we got that weaker JOLTS data, that certainly helped the rates market. Rates have just been on this trajectory toward lower and lower yields, and I think there's now a fear of missing out because now you have more people. Some large banks last week came out with their calls for over 100 basis points of cuts. Even Anna Wong at Bloomberg Economics now thinks that we're going to have 125 basis points of cuts next year. I'm a little bit more skeptical of that. I remain more in the 50 than they are today. So, don't miss out and buy now.
Go ahead, Carol.
Well, what are we seeing in terms of credit spreads or financial conditions? Because what I'm curious about or worried about is if rates continue to trend lower, does it kind of make people, we're already seeing it, right? The risk on trade going across so many different asset classes. We certainly saw that in November. So does it raise the risk of maybe the Fed recommencing raising interest rates? Like, can we just take that off the table, or do we need to still maybe say that could happen?
So we're putting out our Fed preview tomorrow morning. So so I have to be a little bit careful here what I say. But at the end of the day, I think that the Fed's going to stay the course. And you're right, things like financial conditions being easier actually is not good for the Fed. 6 weeks ago, we were talking about the Federal Reserve being happy that 10-year yields were at 5% and doing their job for them. Now, if 10-year yields are at 4.2%, they're no longer doing the Fed's job for them, right? We've now eased financial conditions quite substantially. You've had 50 basis point move lower in mortgage rates. You've had as they are, right? We do want a soft landing. So, we're going to keep rates where they are. Yeah, the single biggest thing here, it's pricing for March, May, June kind of time frame for the first cut. That's what's driving a lot of these rallies.
So, Mike McKee, come on back in here and weigh in on what we just heard from Ira Jersey with regard to Federal Reserve officials watching this easing of financial conditions. How do you think they're watching this?
Well, they're watching it, and obviously it has an effect on financial conditions. The question
idea that as we get weaker data, rates are going to trend lower. Like, there's got to be some assumption on their part that they understand some of this is going to happen that might bring some people into the market if you want to buy things.
I mean, they do understand that. And remember, they forecast in September that they'd be cutting rates 2 times in 2024. So it's really a kind of, we'll see next week if they will be cutting.
That we're on hold for some time.
All right, gonna leave
That's
it on
interesting.
What?
He's going to say that.
He's going to say that.
Yeah. He's going to push that view.
Kind of rein us in a little bit.
Yeah. Ira's right.
It's like being a parent. What, Ira, what? Are you laughing? All right, we're going to look forward to what Ira puts out tomorrow. Guys.
I like it when everybody gets along. It's nice.
It happens so rarely.
And we don't have to stay for 2 hours.
Exactly. All right, guys, thank you so much. Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy Correspondent Michael McKee. Track Mike all week. He'll be breaking down all of the jobs data. And, of course, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist Ira Jersey, a must-read when it comes to rate policy. We'll look for his new research out tomorrow.
Line right off the Bloomberg Professional Service, the American power utility Allet is exploring a sale. This according to Reuters. Allet provides energy services in the upper Midwest. They are based in Duluth, and right now the shares are up by 8.5%. We're looking at a mixed day on Wall Street. Little change right now for the S&P 500 index, down 0.5 point. Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading lower by 54 points. 38 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. We've got the Dow now down by about 0.1%. NASDAQ up 40. That is a gain of 0.3%, while the NASDAQ 100 index is up 27 points, up by about 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.17. Of West Texas Intermediate crude. Now, what about the overall market backdrop and the outlook for the Federal Reserve? Cameron Dawson is Chief Investment Officer at New Edge Wealth.
The equity market is not pricing in any form of recession. 12% growth next year, another 10% growth in 2025. And that is where the disconnect is with the bond market, which if you're going to go over 75 basis points of cuts, you're effectively saying that there's a higher risk of recession. So it's a question of, does the equity market come down to the bond market, or the bond market then come up to the equity market?
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And a federal judge now deciding the fate of JetBlue's $3.8 billion acquisition of Spirit after a 5-week U.S. antitrust trial. Recapping, stocks are trading little change right now. S&P